I said, great, okay, and I imagined that we'd be going through narrow mountain passes and ducking from bush to bush, and it would be really exciting because the border with Afghanistan is about 1,400 kilometers long, and there are said to be about 300, 400 smuggling routes, so you can imagine how porous the border is. And so we went to this area called Dower Barber. But there was nothing secretive about it. In fact, there was probably more people in Dower Barber than there are in this room tonight. There were camel traders, there were donkey traders, there were people selling refreshments, people selling carpets. There were Afghan families with all their goods packed into hand carts heading towards Pakistan, unable to bear facing yet another war in their country, wanting to get to the safety of Pakistan. And there were lots of young men striding over from Pakistan, looking for Taliban recruiting officers because they wanted to sign up and fight with the Taliban against the Great Satan, as they referred to America. By this time, the Afghan shoes I had been wearing were cutting into my feet and they were bleeding and sore. And I complained, and one of my guides said, well, we're only 10 minutes away from the border, but we can go by donkey. And he said, can you ride a donkey? And I thought, can I ride a donkey? You know, I can ride a horse, I can jump with a horse. Look at these donkeys, they're smaller. They're the same shape and size, same shape, you know, and they look more or less the same, but they're smaller, probably easier to control. Of course I can ride a donkey. And so we set off and did a deal with this man. I never understood how we were hiring it, how he was going to get it back, but he was happy to part with the donkey. And I got on its back. Now, I don't know if it sensed that it had an infidel on its back or what, but it just bolted. And it tore through this area. And my feet were waving, my arms were waving. The wind caught the burqa that I was wearing and billowed the burqa, which made the creature even more frightened, and it ran even faster. I was screaming, my arms like this. I must have looked like a giant bat trying to balance on this wretched beast which was out of control. And as I moved forward to try and get hold of the reins just to stop it, the one piece of equipment that I had taken with me, a camera banned under the Taliban, slipped out of the folds of my burqa right into the passing view of a Taliban soldier. He saw this and went crazy. Now, I don't know whether the donkey stopped and threw me off, whether he stopped the donkey and pulled me off. What happened, I really can't remember. All I remember is hitting the ground at a great rate of speed and then picking myself up. And as I drew myself up, I looked straight into the face of this Taliban soldier through the grill of my burqa. And he was screaming and shouting at me. When I got back to London, some of my girlfriends said, what was going through your mind at that precise moment when you knew the game was up? And I said, well, for a nanosecond, and I said it was a nanosecond, I looked at this Taliban soldier and I thought, my goodness, you're gorgeous. He had the most amazing green emerald eyes, very high cheekbones, and a great big beard with a life of its own. Very, very striking. But as I say, it was a nanosecond. And then I thought, oh, I've been caught. So I took my camera off and I handed it to him, and then I closed my eyes, waiting to be shot in the head. And when I opened my eyes after a few seconds, he'd gone. He'd gone over to the man who hired the donkeys. He wanted to know who is in charge of this woman. And then he would get to the bottom of the camera. I was delighted. I thought, I can get away. He still doesn't realize that there's a Westerner under the burqa. And I turned and went to attach myself to another group to follow them over the border. And as I walked away, I looked behind, and by this time a crowd of about 100 men had surrounded my two guides, and the soldier was in the middle, and he's screaming and shouting and waving the camera at him. One of the guides had been smacked across the face and he had a bloody nose, and the other one was trying to calm down the situation. And I looked and I thought, I can't leave them behind. Although we had made an agreement that if things did go pear-shaped, none of us knew each other, I couldn't abandon them. And so I went back and I tried to push my way through these very angry men, and they pushed me back. This was man's business. It had nothing to do with a woman. So in the end, I removed my burqa and said in a very loud voice, "Will somebody let me through?" You could have heard a pin drop. And then there was a parting like the Red Sea as I walked towards the handsome soldier, who by this time was looking really gormless because his jaw just dropped as he saw a Westerner, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, come towards him. And I thought, he is going to be so happy to have got his hands on a Westerner that he'll forget all about my two guides. And as I walked, I shot them a sideways glance, and I could see by the full horror on their face that just when they thought things couldn't get any worse, they had. I had emerged. I went up to the soldier, demanded the return of my camera, and once he'd recovered, he got the three of us and we were bundled into a vehicle and taken off in the direction of Jalalabad. During the journey, the driver and the Taliban soldier had a very fierce exchange, and they kept looking back at me and arguing and looking back, and suddenly the driver did an emergency stop. The soldier asked me to get out of the car. And then he took me to this raised piece of ground and asked me to stand on it from the way he was motioning. So I stood on this raised piece of ground, and then he went off. He went marching off to my left, and I thought, where's he gone? And I'm standing there, rigid with fear, daren't move on this little tiny hill. And I'm looking around, and then all I can see are stones and pebbles and rocks. And I thought, this is the stoning corner. I'm going to be stoned. He's gone off to get a crowd. He's probably gone off somewhere to say, hey, I've got a Westerner stoning in 10 minutes. So I'm standing there and I'm looking down, and all I could see was blood-red nail varnish coming up from my toes. I'd lost my socks and shoes in the melee, and I thought, oh no, nail varnish is banned under the Taliban. If they see my toes, they'll probably chop them off one by one. So I tried to cover my toes as well. And I don't know what it is about Afghanistan. The place can be deserted 1 minute, and in the next 20 seconds you can have a crowd. And about 20 seconds later, there were about 80 scary-looking men staring back at me, and they were getting closer and closer. Of course, I'm thinking that they're getting closer and closer so they can take a good aim when the stoning starts. And I'm looking round at them and trying to find a kind face, maybe a hero, somebody who will come to my defense. And I couldn't see one. Everybody just looked really hostile. Of course, the reason why they were getting closer and closer was to have a better look, because